The red light is
The
on.
red light is on. Okay. There you go. Okay, everybody. Let's get started with Nantucket Conservation Meeting, Monday, March 25th, 2019. If you're recording, please let us know. And if you could silence your cell phones, it'd be highly appreciated. We're going to start with the public meeting, public comment for items not being heard tonight.
I just have two real quick. Just as a reminder, our next regular meeting isn't until the 10th of April.
Yep.
We normally be next week. But it is not next week, it is the following week. We have a 3-week gap. As town meeting is next Monday.
Okay.
So just want to remind everyone the town meeting is next Monday. And
Excellent.
hopefully it will just be next Monday. Knock on wood.
I think it will, Joe.
I'm holding you to that, Stephen.
Okay, so we're going into the public hearing, notice of intent. The Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, 59 and 119 Baxter Road.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, Stephen Cohen, as you know, for the applicant. This is our 8th meeting on this, and sort of the innumerable time we've discussed it based on the prior hearings and reports, and I think you're all very well aware of what we're dealing with at this point. We have submitted a substantial amount of information showing why we have the legal justification for going from a erosion protection structure to a coastal engineering structure, why there's an imminent danger, basically, which we're defining as going to the point where the dune has eroded and the toe of the bank is at risk. Lots of information on why the alternatives analysis has been vetted and the proposed project is the best available design, why the protections are in place to the highest extent possible, why the mitigation, that we're proposing is both meeting the law and providing much more protection, essentially not just here on Nantucket, but really anywhere on the eastern seaboard as far as one of the most advanced monitoring and mitigation systems anywhere. And that the failure and success criteria that we propose will and monitoring criteria that we'll propose will ensure that there is both hopefully a approved system that you can feel comfortable with, meeting the law and meeting the natural environment's needs now and in the future, because you will have the ability to both get that information on a regular basis and make any adjustments as needed, which is somewhat unique in your permitting, not as common in your permitting. At this point, I think that although we've submitted a written submission, that we don't necessarily need to go through and present it. We'll save everybody a little time and effort on that. And I think where we are at this point is we're holding open the public hearing on the idea that if the discussion of a proposed order of conditions, if you're inclined to grant one, suggests that you actually do want more information or have additional questions that would need a submission into the record, we wanted to make sure that that was available. And we also wanted to leave it open that if there was any requirement for any kind of dialogue that could happen. Obviously, if you close the hearing, neither one of those things can really happen. So I think at this point, that's where we are, that we don't have any presentation on additional new information. I don't know that anybody else has any presentation on additional new information. I mean, clearly we have positions, other people have positions. There's some area of agreement. There's lots of areas where there will never be agreement, and I think everybody's pretty clear on where those are. And at this point, we're sort of, we think the most fruitful thing to do would be to go through where you are on this project and where you think you might foresee issues that you want to either get more information on or have questions for Jeff about or have technical questions on, so that we can move forward in one direction or another. So I'll just leave it at that and basically give the floor to Jeff, I think, in terms of the best way he thinks to approach it from here.
Wow.
Didn't expect that.
No, that's 6:07. Yeah, that's already to me. I think you guys have a number of options. I mean, there's a lot of public here that have comment, and I know there was new information submitted to the record that everyone saw. So I would stay with the normal procedure and open it up for you guys to ask any questions as it relates to that. And then obviously give the public ample time to raise questions or concern, and you guys can address those or further a discussion on that or turn it to the applicant. I think at some point, if there was a discussion on which orders of conditions or things may look like, that's certainly available to you guys as an option as well. Or any outstanding questions or concerns that are there. I mean, I think from our end, the information is in, so we're really just filling out the record as far as questions that you guys have at this point. All of the required information has been met. So whatever technical questions that you guys have or concerns that get raised by you or the public, we're kind of to that point of the hearing. So I'd say just kind of stay the course for how we normally do.
No problem. I have a couple questions. I was looking at the surveys over time from the first one and the last one of the shoreline location of mean high water. The raw numbers, are they available in our files as opposed to the tables of all the points? Because I was having a hard time finding the general raw numbers. I did look at the ones in the reports, obviously, but.
Yes. Jeff, I believe that the appendix, now I forget which appendix number it is, from Woods Hole Group is transmitted to you with all the raw data.
Correct. They are all in the regular quarterly reports and appendices that are.
They were in, see, I didn't notice them.
It's a large Excel file.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll get that. I'll make sure I get that from Jeff.
That was, I think, part of the monitoring requirement is that all the raw data. be
Correct.
provided to the
Right.
commission.
Right, great. Yeah, I started looking at those, and I mean, it's sort of a relatively short time frame when you consider the scale of the data that has come in from that all the monitoring, and the general trends pre and post are very kind of hard to really, in my mind, to sort of pinpoint anything, and that doesn't surprise me. I mean, the history of projects like this, and you do Nourish, it's hard to see like an immediate or anything. But so I just want to look at those numbers again. I was looking for them this week, and I was also trying to finish up my tax stuff, and nothing personal, but the tax stuff had to get done. So, other question?
Yeah, I have a few. I think I might start out with a question for Applied Coastal, if I might, and maybe for you, Trey. So, seeing that this project is likely not to go away in some fashion, I want to know from you if we're dealing with something that, besides the nourishment component of it, the underlying engineering of the structure, is there, I haven't really heard a markedly different or better way from the other side. In other words, to say that, besides some soft tiering at the top and maybe at the ends.
So, just to clarify your question
So
is
my question is there a markedly better
approach at stopping erosion?
approach to stopping this erosion at this place, given everything we've heard so far? Besides the mitigation, let's take the
Sure.
sand mitigation out of it.
I mean, obviously, you could take a number of different approaches, whether they're permittable or not, is always a big first question. I mean, obviously, you could go for offshore breakwater that's, a mile long, and that would stop all the wave energy from coming in, but something like that would likely never get permitted in the state, unless we have a huge legislature kind of change in direction. It actually wouldn't get permitted on the federal level either. So there's different approaches to take, but the biggest question, and this isn't trying to avoid your question, is can you get them permitted? I think if I had carte blanche and had to hold the line, I don't think it'd be permittable. I'd probably go with keyhead groins, which you're going to have the same problem, but you're never going to get it permitted. would your impacts be any less? They'd probably be more significant. But I think the question has to be not so much what can you do, engineering wise, just to stop erosion. It's, you know, how do we look at the erosion, and can we do something to either mitigate it or not? But you have to look beyond where you are. You have to look at, you know, what's happening adjacent to it.
Right.
I mean, that's the biggest problem when we go to coastal engineering structures. There's certain areas that, you know, doing anything is just not warranted because the adverse impacts are so significant that you're just passing the buck down the line.
No, I get
As
it.
you said, a project likely won't go away until it literally fails on its own, regardless of whatever our conditions are. And I'm feeling the legal system stop anything like that. So if you're going to go forward, what steps can you take to make it the best project possible? You know, whether it's, you know, mitigation, design, whatnot.
And that's ultimately what I think we're trying to get to. If the alternative of doing nothing is not on the table, which I don't think it's on the table to just do nothing, then are we at the best place we are now as far as what's being presented to us, and then how do we condition it appropriately?
In some circumstances, I would say the do-nothing approach is the actual best approach. I mean, there's certain spots along the coast that, no matter what we've done, the development was placed in a poor position. It should have never been built there.
Right.
Whether it's because it's low lying or it's on a eroding bluff or somewhere. And I think going forward, especially with sea level rise, climate change, we're going to have to start making those hard decisions that not everywhere can be saved. There's
Right.
definitely certain areas that are worthwhile and that we can work on, and there's others that it may be difficult, but we have to make that choice. That's really kind of up to you to decide that. But in the sense that if you're going to try to do everything you can, then I would say, you know, you can't forget mitigation, you can't forget design, you can't, you know, ignore what's going on downrift. And so some of your conditions might be onerous, it seems, for, you know, what's behind it, but you know, what are your choices? Are you just going to allow impacts everywhere else just because this one spot needed it? Those are those hard decisions that have to be made.
Sure. All right, so building on that, to SBPF, I personally am very concerned about the sustainability of this project, and I think I've said it probably at every meeting, but, so going forward, I'm, you know, wanting to know how we're gonna ensure that if this project goes into failure, how are we going to ensure that it doesn't sit in an endless appeal cycle for years, and probably most importantly, end up with no mitigation sand, with no funding, with no work done to it, and essentially sits out as a hard armored structure, in which case it's going to do some very accelerated damage to either end. And maybe that is a question for Mr. Pucci and a legal end of it. Are there legal means to say that, you know, if the Concom deems this a failure and says, game over, we're removing this, you know, removing it is going to destabilize the bank considerably and possibly take a home or two down with it.
Yeah, I mean, you can put performance standards in, but it doesn't eliminate your concern about, say you put a performance standard in and you say, you have an enforcement situation, you say, you're in violation, this is causing X, Y, Z damage, and we order it removed. And, they, you know, that doesn't prevent them from appealing that and tying it up in that situation. So, yeah, you can't really build in safeguards that protect you against that, about a party's ability to appeal, how long these things typically take. So that, you know, it's definitely a concern.
Okay.
If you're contemplating an emergency situation,
Right.
you know, so the only thing that you can do is the extent within your jurisdiction, you can try to build in safeguards in the event of a failure, you know, sand availability or whatever those requirements might be. And the only other way would be through, you know, the other process of if there's any type of lease agreement or license agreement in effect with the town, you know, through provisions in there to try to protect you. But it's definitely a concern about the ability of a party, you know, and not through a bad faith act, but just people exercising their appeal rights.
Right, sure.
The time that takes.
So, as it relates to the town, is there a licensure avenue that can go through?
There would be, yeah, in the event of permitting for this, there would be either a license or a lease agreement. There would be some type of agreement in place with the town through the select board, and that's contingent also. There are a couple of warrant articles. There's you know, some different things that are going on that could affect the town's ability to enter into that agreement. But there's town land involved in this project area, so even if permitted, it would still be subject to some type of agreement with the town, with the select board.
And would that, would the ability to revoke a license fall into any appeal?
You know, a couple of things about that. So you could use currently there's a license agreement in effect for the existing project. And there are safeguards, you know, that were put into that agreement to the best, you know, that council could come up with and agree to that were within reason. You know, make it revocable solely in the discretion of the select board. You know, insurance provisions in place, various financial safeguards. But, you know, agreements like that are only as good as the parties that, you know, are making them and
Right.
their intent to deal with those in good faith. So yeah, they would be, you would, the town would make its best effort to best protect the town's interests, in, you know, property interests along this area, but, you know, there's no guarantee.
There's no guarantee, right.
You know, because you got Mother Nature and you have parties, you know, exercising their, you know, their rights to assert their legal position. So it's, you know, those are two powerful forces that
Yeah.
in place. But it, you know, it tends to go a little beyond what your definitely valid concerns, but it goes a little beyond Concom's province here, which is to look at it and say, well, here are the performance standards that are applicable to it. Here's what we would, here would be grounds for denial. Here would be grounds for approval with conditions.
Right.
Here would be legal grounds for these conditions within your jurisdiction, and you do your best under your performance standards to either deny it or approve it with conditions.
Right. All right, so if there's no guarantee that if we order this out, that it's coming out, then, you know, back to SBPF, what's the future of this? I mean, what kind of money is available for this going forward? I mean, this is gonna potentially, we have an increase in exposure over time. We have sea level rise, we have sand that we don't know where's it coming from. We have homeowners in the future that may or may not want to sign on to this, certainly from a cost standpoint. So what kind of guarantee do we have this going forward into, you know, an unknown future?
So I appreciate your concern, Ben, because I think that it's important to look at this as a long-term project and its sustainability. I get that there's no guarantees in life on anything, but at the same time, I do think that there's actually a pretty good legal basis here to answer your first question, which is that you know, the Conservation Commission obviously can't issue an order that says, by the way, this order is unappealable. Like, you obviously can't. No regulatory board can make the order unappealable. However, because this project happens to overlap with a real estate and contract issue with the town, the town has a very, I think, strong position to be able to say, well, we are reserving the right to revoke our licensure or lease on the real estate end of it, and to require, as you are and as the town does, an escrow to be in place for this removal, and to actually have authority to tap into that money to do the removal if a certain criteria is hit. And I think, obviously the hardest place to appeal from is abandonment of the system and failure to provide the sand mitigation. If that's happening, I don't know who could both abandon and appeal at the same time. That seems like, sort of a tough situation to go to court with. And in fact, I don't know, it's not a likely scenario. I think once you've abandoned it, you've abandoned it.
But the group, the SBPF group may have abandoned it, but the homeowners still would benefit from having protection, so they wouldn't have abandoned it.
Yeah, well, a little bit, but the homeowners and SPPF are essentially the same people.
Maybe now, but maybe not in the future.
Yeah, well, so the SPPF is a more than 25-year-old nonprofit that essentially is comprised of people in the area, most of whom are on the front of Baxter Road, but some of whom are further back or who care about the issue. The value of these homes is significant to these people, both financially and emotionally, in the way they connect to their properties. There's a lot of historic homes on that property, on this stretch of land as well, and the commitment to protecting them has been going on for almost 3 decades. Will that continue forever? I don't know. I can't talk about that. But will it continue for a long time? I'm hoping that you will grant that permit. We have a plan that we've discussed that if this order of conditions is issued, we would then transition to putting in place long-term funding solutions, like having a tax management district to deal with it, or instead of having it just be private funds, we would put in place other long-term mechanisms. We are looking at how to have offshore sand as opposed to pit sand. We're looking at lots of things, but those things only make sense if you have a long-term position. For a 3-year position, none of them make sense. So SPPF is not going to undertake this effort without having confidence in the ability to maintain it long-term, because frankly, the initial cost is very substantial. It's not worth it if it doesn't pan out into the long-term future. I do want to correct one thing that you said, which I'm not an engineer, but I've talked to our engineers about it, which is that there seems to be a small misconception that the geotubes are holding up the bluff, and if they were removed, that it would collapse. That's not correct. The geotubes are protecting the toe of the bluff from being eroded, but they're not supporting it.
Right.
Yeah, if you remove them, the bluff wouldn't collapse, but it would become exposed, and you would then slough off and collapse after it was eroded. But it's not like it would collapse during the removal process. Which I think is a significant difference. If this order of conditions is issued, it will be a very expensive installation project, and it will be a very expensive maintenance project. And the people backing this understand that. No one's going into it blind. And we're looking at long-term solutions that we put into place to make it sustainable for the people who are involved, to make it sustainable for the community, not just economically sustainable, but to make sure that the benefits, to make sure that the mitigation is succeeding as well. No one really wants to get into a failure criteria. Economically, environmentally, mitigation, beach access, any of those things.
George, I have a question. This is a complex situation since it's being permitted through a private nonprofit, which as far as I know, doesn't own any of the properties that are being protected. I don't think they own any of the organization itself. I don't know if it has any property, value assets per se to protect private homes, but the project's really on public property, on town land. If this thing does, it all just comes apart, who ultimately is responsible? Who, if somebody down shore feels they're getting damaged, who do they file suit against?
Those, by the way, I usually go through the chair.
Oh, go
I'm
right
sorry.
ahead, go through.
It's
Well,
okay, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, Andy.
well, he was the chair though, so.
I'm sorry.
I understand, but I just didn't want to be disrespectful.
No, that's fine. I was like,
Sorry, Andy.
Well, Ernie was the chair longer than I was, so you're sort of still around.
I was just closer, that's.
Exactly, appreciate it. No, go ahead.
No, it's, you know, again, it's something that has been built into that contractual process with the town. So, you know, if you just take the existing, project, into account and the existing agreements, there are safeguards built into that. Again, as good as those legal agreements can be, there's indemnification, provisions where SBPF has to indemnify the town against any claims for, you know, downdrift property damage or other damage caused to the structure. They have to indemnify the town for removal of the structure if that's ordered or warranted. You know, they have to maintain insurance listing the town as a named insured, provisions like that. But you have a very limited ability to protect yourself against those types of concerns. If your concern was, you know, the town as a landowner involved in this project, that really is coming through whatever can be negotiated with the select board on behalf of the town, protect those property interests.
And technically, the landowners are up against it. We just don't have every single person in here operating independently.
But that's true. Even though SPPF is not the actual property owner, there are property owners, actual existing property owners signed off on various of these agreements that are in place. But no indemnification agreement can prevent the party from saying, I ain't bound by that, or I'm not in existence anymore. You know, so you can have it to the best of your ability and monitor the ability of that party who is the indemnitor, you know, but you can't, you know, safeguard against all possible contingencies. You just have it in place and hope that those parties are still going to be in existence when and if you need to call on them under indemnification. But again, there's insurance provisions as well. So, you know, if that party is not solvent at any point, there's also the insurer. That's, you know, naming the town as a conditional insurer on these potential contingencies. You know, and you're really looking at financial issues there and protection of property interests, but you're not safeguarding potential environmental catastrophes in that sense. Yeah, maybe you're protecting yourself financially or the town, but if there are, you know, environmental consequences that you're concerned with, you don't have the ability to financially protect against that.
Well, I know one thing we're concerned about, I think Ashley brought up this point, is that if this thing goes south and there's a whole bunch of huge plastic bags sitting on the beach and we get tied up in court about taking them out and they all end up in the ocean, or a significant portion of them ends up in the ocean, that's something we do not want to happen.
Yeah.
That's a concern, that it's really you know, all this concern about, oh, we can't have straws. Good, these are awfully big straws full of sand.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I actually have the question I proposed to SBPF about the plastic fibers from the geotubes entering the environment, because I do think the assemblage of materials is potentially very dangerous to the environment, whether it's shedding fibers every time waves hit it, or just in the disrupting nutrient cycling on the beach, because one of the functions of a beach is to cycle nutrients. And if you've put woven polypropylene geotextile geotubes, that's putting a material on the beach that's potentially damaging to marine ecosystems. And certainly, if it was tied up in court and they started to fall apart into bigger pieces, that would be a major issue.
So I do think that this concern is legitimate, but that it's somewhat outside of the Concom's jurisdiction and more falls into the select board and the town's ability to deal with that as the licensor of the real estate where they would have access to the escrow and have the ability to act. And certainly, George could craft language, or the town council's office could craft language that would, enable them to access that money under certain conditions to prevent that kind of situation, which SBPF wouldn't want to see either. So I think that is something that could be addressed at that level. Which again is one of the benefits of the complexity of this project, is that there are legal avenues available here that aren't in most of your projects.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. That's not in our purview, but the plastic aspect.
No, that part is, I meant
Yeah.
the removal, like,
Yeah,
it was in order to remove,
right,
the
but-
Concom couldn't do it, right?
Right.
The Concom doesn't hold the money, the Concom doesn't have any ability to do that, but the town
I
could
see your
both
point.
hold the money and hire a contractor and do it as a landowner, part of the lease or license.
So, through the chair, Steve, I'm glad you just said that the plastic is in our purview, because the previous answer of SBPF is this topic is beyond the scope of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Nantucket Wetlands Protection Bylaw. Further, the study of microplastics in the environment is still in its infancy. So we are acknowledging that plastics fall under the Wetlands Protection Act, because I would think so. But your previous answer did not say that.
The interest of the act, storm damage prevention, flood control, prevention of pollution. It's protection of groundwater, protection of shell fisheries, protection of wildlife habitat. I mean, when you look at those, the placement of man-made materials to hold the sand in place is, the question is, how does that adversely affect those interests of the act?
For the beach ecosystem, where one of the functions of a beach ecosystem
Well,
is
when
to
it's
cycle
properly-
nutrients.
When it's properly installed and maintained, and everything is contained, it's covered by the sand and is isolated from the beach ecosystem. What I think your question is, the line of questioning that has been ongoing in the last few minutes is, if this is exposed, if it's abandoned, if it, all these kind of drastic what ifs, and it's left there while people appeal things. What we're looking at in terms of the order of conditions, the project is that this is installed properly and maintained properly, and the orders require it to be maintained properly. I think the current order of conditions has the requirement for an escrow account for its removal. And then the attorneys have been talking about the other mechanisms that the town has for having the funds available for it to be removed, so that you avoid this potential situation. But what we're looking to get permitted is for this to be built properly and maintained properly. And when it's built and maintained, we're not having plastic bags on the beach, plastic geotube bags on the beach.
So I guess I completely, unfortunately, through the chair, disagree with that, because they're physically, even if they're uncovered, they're physically within the beach. So they're there. Like, I get what you're saying, that if they're uncovered, then they're a problem on the beach, but nutrient cycling is happening in the sand of the beach. So a foot down, you have microorganisms cycling nutrients. So on the face of that bag, or where it's even dug into a beach, that 67,000 square feet of beach that is unmitigated for, you're replacing that with a plastic-based textile. And I realize that I'm not submitting all of the recent studies that have come out for the damages of fibers, so things that you'd have trouble testing on this site to see the fibers getting into the beach. That's absolutely an issue here when
So
you're looking at the beach.
Are you saying that the geotubes are approvable on that basis?
I think that is part of the concern for me, where they're replacing beach and there's no mitigation for it. Yes.
The regulation for coastal beach, allow for projects that are built to protect the coastal bank, to build CESs, allow the placement of the CES on the beach. That's the only time that that's allowed, is when the project is there as a CES to protect the 378 homes. So this project, as proposed, is in compliance with the performance standards for coastal bank and coastal beach, because of the type of project it is to protect the stability of the coastal bank.
So, if there's a thought that some product is unapprovable on any basis because its long-term exposure to the environment is a hazard, which I think is what Ashley is suggesting, then, first of all, we don't obviously agree with that, nor is that the experience or the case of these use of these from Florida to Maine and on this coast. But if that's the case, then you're suggesting, I think, re-examining other alternatives that would be viable. So any alternative has a negative. A rock revetment would be great in a lot of ways and has negatives. Marine mattresses would be great in a lot of ways and have negatives. We could cycle through the pros and cons of everything if you guys want to start revisiting. Start from the beginning on which alternative is the best way to do this.
Actually, I have a curiosity question. About way back when, the expansion was proposed to be rock revetment, and I'm just curious why you shifted away towards the tubes, and at the time you weren't crazy about the tubes. So I'm just curious why that change, if you don't mind.
So the proposal was originally a rock revetment because it's essentially permanent, it's natural, it has craggy surfaces that have deflect the reflection or refraction in a better way than a more solid surface. It has the ability for the water actually to go in and out through the little holes and cracks and everything. And as solid as they actually have a lot of advantages that way. The major problem with the revetment, obviously, is that it is both really expensive to put in and very difficult to remove, because these are 3, 4, 5-ton rocks, each one. And it was the commission at the time that pushed us pretty hard that they wanted something that could be potentially removable. And when you look at what removable options are, the geotubes are the most removable in the most sensitive way on the beach, and they also go in a little easier, and they have lots of advantages compared to like a steel or wooden wall and cement wall and some other things that we looked at. But that's where we ended up with the geotubes, and they also actually go in really fast, because if you remember that this was originally installed under the emergency order, and the emergency order required a fast installation. You can't install a rock revetment wall quickly, but you can install geotubes pretty quickly. And that's how we ended up with the tubes. But in retrospect, they have worked very well and are more manageable to work with than some other things. I actually think the rock revetment would be the way to go, but that's not where we are. And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I was wondering why you had made that shift in your application. But, okay. Other questions?
Sand sourcing, you said that you were going to either go offshore or pit sand. How confident are you getting offshore sand permitted? And then the rentability of the sand coming over on a barge to supply the 4,000 feet of sand?
So, we feel reasonably confident that we can do this offshore, but it's gonna take a few years. We have been, as I said at the last hearing, started to see the feasibility of bringing sand from offshore if necessary. I mean, from the mainland if necessary. I don't think that's a great option, but it is one that we're looking at. And other upland sources on the island are also, under consideration. We get into a little bit of a, which comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of situation with this. It's a complicated project. Solving the long-term sourcing of sand is a very important part of it. We have bought into and have delivered on the idea that we're gonna deliver significant volumes of sand to maintain this project on an ongoing basis. If we can't, we have agreed to a whole bunch of stipulations as far as the removal, because we want to maintain it. So the town's protection is, if we don't do what we said we're agreeing to do, you know, we're in violation, and maybe there's an appeal over gray areas, but if we've abandoned the project or we're clearly not, you know, providing the sand, we're in violation. It's not gonna last for very long. So we are counting on the ability to solve this long-term sand question. I think the offshore route is gonna be the best route for us. And if we're not successful with that, we're gonna be in trouble. And we're not gonna be able to maintain the project. And it's gonna have to be removed.
Okay.
You know, I think one thing you guys have to understand is that Josh actually has to pitch this both ways, because after we come to you, he then needs to go to the people that are funding it, whose homes are there, and he has to convince them that this is gonna work to protect your homes, and that we can long-term finance it, and that it's viable. So, you know, there is a market analysis and an economic analysis that goes into this. The people are not going to go forward with this from that perspective if they don't feel confident in either. So, you know, it's not just get the permit and we'll figure it out later. It's too expensive and too complicated and too long-term for us not to do that on both sides.
Just to elaborate on that a little bit more, we can't go out and start working on permitting the offshore sand if we're gonna be in a situation where we can't even build it anyways. It's not gonna be a permit issue.
Yeah, no, I
understand.
totally get that.
So
Yeah.
you can't take that step until we get past the step that's in front of you.
What about, you must have done some studies into kind of what's available from current available borrow pits here, where you've been getting it so far, and what's the forecast for, you know, without developing any kind of new area? Is it 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we see, I don't know, Jamie, do you wanna jump in here?
Sure. I mean, specifically, Colgate's pit doesn't have much left in it
Right.
at all.
Yeah.
Reese has hundreds of thousands of yards left. He's expanding that, kind of, at a rate that works for his business plan as well, so it's not just come and get it whenever you want to.
Right.
We have started, working with some of the various projects around town where we get the SID analysis done and submitted to Jeff prior to doing so, and so that's been a good option for us. If it's compatible sand, we can make an arrangement, we can use that material for it. And I think there will be some of that as well, and so, I mean, it is a dynamic process where we need to be creative and figure out, okay, what's the next best step? I'm sure that Miles's won't be the last pit on Nantucket ever, but, right now.
Right now it is.
And barging has actually worked out really well for us. The barging is what sets the local prices for sand.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, you know, we've been bringing over 1,000 cubic yards at a time. In barge, we've been sourcing sand for projects, and we've been using the Burrow site. Between those three, sources, it's worked out pretty well for last year.
And are there any compatibility issues with barging it in from, I mean, obviously there shouldn't be so far, but foreseen compatibility issues?
No, I mean, the amount of sand available off island seems infinite. So we would get it from the custom soils. And you go up there and their sand is super compatible.
So, given that, with Josh's comment, it likely in the act that this gets permitted, it might be years for gaining a permit for an offshore burrow site for sand. trucking and barging and trucking. Where, I haven't really seen, where's your access points for all this? I know you haven't really nailed it down, but that's a big area to try to get sand on. I'm just curious if you must have an idea about that.
There are some access points shown on the plan. I think we're
That'll
talking
cover
about.
all of this.
Yeah, there'll be one up by the lighthouse. There'll be the is that what you're talking about? How we get over the top of the bluff?
Yeah, because you have 1 point now.
1 point now, and I think the plan shows 3 points. And one of the things that we've been talking about is potentially at some point figure out a way to add a 4th point just at the southern edge, because it's nice to be able to deliver directly to the ends. That's worked out well for us on this current project on the southern end.
So, have we talked about phased-in project? You know, we have about 3,000 linear feet. Right, for the expansion and expansion. And I think it's tipping a lot of us over, you know, with such an increase in scope, are you gonna be able to keep up with it, right? So, going from, what is it, what's it currently, how many linear feet?
1,000.
It's 1,000, all right, so 300% increase, is that right?
You've
Yeah,
got
900.
about 2/3 of that to the south and 1/3 to the north.
Right.
And I don't think the plan would be necessarily to install it all at once, right? We'd probably do the south first, but,
I think we want to be able to install it all.
yeah.
So, so maybe you haven't considered a phase-in project, but it might be something to think about, you know, to take it in 750-foot sections or something, you know, over a few years, 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, the part of the problem with that is that the gearing up for it is the biggest impact.
Mhm.
So doing that every year, it's not only expensive, it's sort of like the most burdensome. It's the install part, or, you know, once you've gearing up every year would have a much more substantial.
Well, maybe it's not every year, maybe it's, you know, you install 700 feet and you let it sit for a few years and we'll see where we're at, yeah.
Well, but, just from experience of working on projects, for example, I have one that's 4,000 feet right now, up on the Merrimack River, and it's to mobilize once and to do it once is, you know, quicker, faster, and it's cheaper. The mobilization, demobilization is a big cost,
Mhm.
and that's a fixed cost every time you do it.
Yep.
So mobilizing once and demobilizing once is less expensive than mobilizing every year for 4 years.
Sure.
Also, you have the equipment and materials there, and you do it.
Mhm.
That's, you know, every client is different, and every decision is different, and it becomes a case-by-case basis, but there's a lot of pros to doing it once, pros and cons each way, doing it once or doing it phased.
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever, that's up to SBDF to decide if they want to do it phased or not.
Yeah, I also think that I sort of get the concept of that, but the practicality of it, in addition to the cost and the burden, is that I don't know that you'd see a substantial benefit, because if you only do 750 feet this year, and then 750 feet next year, and then 750 feet, you know, the year after that, or whatever, not enough time has passed in between for you to see whether or not there was, you know, a benefit to waiting, or.
Well,
or,
that's,
you
yeah, I
know,
wouldn't say it would be a year, you know, in year increments. I'd say it'd be 750 feet, then wait 3 years, then 750 feet, wait 3 years, something like that. You know, that would be, so you'd have time to study what's going on. Are we, you know, we're really, it's a big project, and we all agree that it's a big project, and it's, what, 7% of the eastern shore has been kind of thrown out there. Is that accurate? So with that, we're going full steam ahead into a very large project without really knowing what it's going to have. If you're going to be able to keep up with it, what kind of environmental impacts we're going to see from it. So, you know, I think it would make some sense to explore incremental installations.
I think we do know what kind of impacts that we would see, and we also have substantial monitoring in place to track that and to report on it, and it's not a shot in the dark. You know, it's not, you know, a bright line prediction, but it's not wide open either. And slowing it down to see, you know, what would happen over time, and to just take the chunk that we have, you'd end up having so much more erosion at the south, so much more loss of homes, so much more loss of the public infrastructure, more loss of the bluff walk, more loss of the currently not denuded face of the bluff. I think there'd be some fairly substantial negative impacts, frankly, of waiting on the ends. You'd have a much higher likelihood of a breach on the north end, up by the lighthouse. I think there are some real dangers to waiting, and not a lot of benefit to waiting compared to sort of the position that you'd also be in through the monitoring process.
You know, when we raised all of this most recently in the winter of 2013, the proposal was 4,000 feet from the lighthouse property to basically the same place that it's currently proposed. Because the next winter was coming quickly, we wanted to protect the most vulnerable area. And so that's where the 1,000-foot geotube project came from. So that was permitted on an emergency basis. We argued about it for the next 2 years and finally got blessed as being allowed to be in place, with the understanding that we would hold off asking for the rest of the 4,000 feet until 2018. And that would give everybody a chance to take a look at 5 winters. We're now ending the 6th storm season winter, to see what impact it has. And so instead of having 4,000 feet installed based on ideas and reports and theories, and we would have actual data on a significant chunk. And so that's what we have now. But the idea that this now turns into permit the first 1,000 feet, study it for 5 years, and then add 750. You know, there's houses that are in danger. And there's a limit to what people what's reasonable. And I think that, you know, we're happy that we've been able to do what we've done in terms of live up to the 5-year test, if you will. We got a ton of data. Doesn't mean it's something that nobody anticipates won't happen 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or next week. But we have the safeguards built in, and we're hopeful that we can get moving on what we agreed to and what everybody has been talking about now for 5 years.
Yeah. The other thing is that a 2,000 linear foot project probably doesn't justify offshore sand and those kind of long-term planning, but a 4,000 linear foot project does, and that's a significant benefit too. And it also brings in more people with more commitments and more money and those kind of things. And it's just, you know, we're not just widening the scope to get more people in there. We're basing it on where the dune is currently eroded. But it just happens to be that longer section helps make the project economically sustainable, helps justify the idea of offshore sand and those kind of things.
And purely on the environmental side, in terms of the vegetated coastal bank and the southern end where there has been tow scour, and we're starting to see that vegetated bank slip off, getting that tow stabilized to blunt that sloughing means that you maintain that vegetated slope as opposed to waiting for it to become denuded, steeper slope, and then try to revegetate that. You know, yes, part of the plan is to vegetate the slope to try to stabilize it, but if it's already well vegetated and then we can stop that sloughing, then you have a much more stable coastal bank. So that's another reason not to delay that.
It's actually a good little segue. I had a question about the legal definition of imminent danger in this situation. Would you have is there in this particular case, the definition the state goes by for?
I would need to look at it.
Okay. It just seems, I've been sort of poking around for a while trying to find a more definition by which the state goes by. Do you have,
So it's not a defined term. It's up to you to make that determination. And when we went through this last time, what we did was we did an assessment of what was within 50 feet. And that number was picked basically on the idea that there had been storm losses of 20 or 30 feet in one storm, and that you couldn't actually go to zero, right? You have to allow yourself some room for the bank to then adjust itself and go to the angle of repose and those kind of things. But that was sort of the idea of what might be lost in one big storm. Was anything within 50 feet would essentially become lost. Because if you lost 30 feet of bluff, something 20 more feet in was also essentially gone. Now, you don't have to show that you could be lost in one storm to be in imminent danger. And so what we have basically done for our definition is both look at how close things are to the edge and also whether or not they could be reasonably moved back. And to the extent you do that, do you really gain any time? You know, if you have 800 feet to move back, or if you have 20 feet to move back, we don't think there's a lot of benefit in looking way down south where someone might have 20 feet that they could move or 25 feet that they could move, and you could gain a couple of years out of that. But what you've lost in requiring that to happen is the bluff walk and the natural vegetated bluff and those kind of things, and you're putting someone on a postage stamp at the loss of that other benefit. So we feel very comfortable that the houses that are being protected are essentially, that the imminent danger occurs when you've lost the dunes and you're at the point where the toe is going to be eroded at, because that's where you have massive sloughing. That's where the imminent danger line we're drawing is.
Right. The dune is protecting the toe of the bank, and we've seen that as the dune has retreated southward, the bank, then the erosion on the bank accelerates. So that's why the idea is to bring this down to the northern extent of the coastal dune.
That sort of brings me into reasonable alternative. Thank you. Did I interrupt you, Andy? Were you?
No, I tend to try to base my thinking on legalities and more so by the state in so many ways, because I just think it's in some ways a stronger baseline.
Yeah. So just to piggyback that, I know Jeff is trying to get your attention.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking for the record, it might be better if somebody came up to the microphone, if you wanted to come to the microphone. It may not be recording for the public,
It doesn't actually record for the public.
Yeah.
It's very hard to hear.
Yeah, it gets
It's very hard to hear. Yeah, sorry about that. I just probably should have given you a microphone.
People have to read Terry's excellent.
She's really good.
Just to your point about state standards, I think is a good one, because one thing that we've confirmed, and I think that I can't remember if Jeff is aware of this or not, but we were essentially confirmed that DEP has all of the information that's been submitted to this, that they're aware of it, that they're essentially monitoring this, and they don't oversee it, but they have followed everything that's going on here. And the standard that we used last time was set through the DEP process, and also if we came in with an order, if you issued an order in which it was clearly not meeting the standard of an imminent danger, DEP could overturn that, because they're obviously concerned not only about local issues, but with the precedent that it might set other places. I think may be aware, just as an aside, there's a place, I think it's Plum Island, where they really want to protect it, and they don't really care about the law as much as they do about protecting it, and they have been, the Concom there has been issuing orders that the DEP has been pushing back on and saying, those aren't legal orders, you can't do that. So, and you know, you guys would never do that kind of thing, but if you were issuing an order that was clearly outside of a reasonable interpretation of that standard, there's somebody watching.
Yeah.
Aside from other people in the room as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the inverse might be true here. Right?
So, bearing in mind that DEP is watching over all of us, I guess I just in the Epsilon letter of March 22nd on page 4, pre-78 home eligible protection. It reads, it should be noted that SBPF provided additional detailed information about the eligibility of the 4 properties, 83, 79, 77, and 73 Baxter Road, challenged by one commissioner as ineligible because of renovations in excess of the standard established in the local bylaw. There has been no data submitted disputing the information provided by SBPF showing these properties as pre-78 home eligible for protection under the Act of the bylaw. Well, I would guess I'm probably the commissioner being referenced here, and I didn't realize that I had to reply because I stand by my math. But there is another issue involved here, the reasonable alternative. And my understanding is that the owners of 77 and 79 Baxter Road have lots on the other side of the road at 76 and 80. Is that true? Empty lots.
So, I suspect that that is you. I know it is. I don't want to not answer the question, but I do want to really affirmatively say that the law and our position is pretty clear that abandonment and relocation off-site is not a reasonable alternative, and we're going to stick really hard on that. Houses have been moved to Monomoy and to save the house, but that is not a reasonable alternative. And we would say that anything off the lot is going beyond what state and local bylaws require.
Well, reduced to
appreciate your view, yeah.
speechlessness yet again. So I don't know if this is the time to ask town council to weigh in on that, or is that something, because there's actually a third lot, is my understanding too, that 63 is also the owner of 63 owns a lot directly across at 64. So, to my pedestrian mind, I would have thought that that would be a reasonable alternative, moving it to the other side of the street. And my understanding is that when the lots were originally designed, that was specifically so that you could move properties backwards on the extended lots. And in fact, it wasn't until 64 that the lots started to being split up. Before that, all the lots had contiguous lots on the other side of Baxter Road. So, and which would lead me on to my next point, which is about the gap lots when we're talking about the actual regulations. And we sort of seem to be turning a Nelsonian eye to the number of gap lots and the length of the gap lots, and what they actually are as a percentage of the overall length that is being requested by us to be permitted. And I would like to really know what the percentage is in terms of the length and what we're asked to consider. And I don't know whether that's something that whether our staff could provide, or you could?
Yeah.
Okay, then because I think that enters into this really. And it's being, it's being sort of moved aside here.
Yeah. Ian, we have that information, we can provide it now. I think it's been submitted as well.
Yes. For the record, Ian, that was submitted with our November 16 letter. We reviewed each lot, identified whether or not it was eligible by the state regulation or the local regulations, and so that has been that has been provided.
So is it broken down as a sort of percentage of the overall length and?
What we did is we gave the number of lots.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it could be broken
Yeah, it's-
down into lengths if
Okay.
you wanted lengths.
Yeah, I
I-
think the assessor, actually, I mean, rough numbers, the assessor's page has a lot of links.
Yeah, I think Jeff said he'd be able to do that.
No, I can mine that through
Yeah.
information for you guys
Right.
as well.
That's my job.
Okay.
I guess what you're sort of getting here are our primary concerns right now tonight, for sure, on a lot of this. Gap lots, imminent danger, source of sand. I mean, I've been asked in the past what our major concerns were, and I think you're getting
Sure.
a good focused, list right here.
Just throwing, not to interrupt, Mr. Chairman, but
Please.
kind of through you, there was also the question raised, and I just want to make sure that we make it clear. So if we're asking George for an opinion on something, that it's clear that there was the question about whether or not relocating a structure to a lot essentially across the road was a reasonable alternative. Did I phrase that correct?
You did.
Yeah, I
Right.
think I can't imagine that the legal world hasn't come up with definitions for this. This is, I mean, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, yeah, and as the same thing with reasonable alternatives and imminent danger for sure. We toss these words around, and I would like to know
So,
that personally.
Just from a legal point of view, there's two ways you get answers for that. Either the agency issues a regulation or some kind of advisory opinion, or someone sues and a court makes a decision and the case law tells
Creates
you what it is.
creates one. Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to seek input from town council on that question, or if you want us to.
Well, no, I was thinking. I just said that, yeah, town council. I think we could look up.
This would be a good project for, an analysis, before you issue your order.
Yeah.
Both what the applicant is arguing, which it appears that either they're saying that they've addressed all these issues, or at least they put out what their arguments are.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd recommend, we look at them issue by issue, whether you're going under the state act or the local bylaw. We provide you an analysis of it before you issue your order. Oftentimes, these issues are litigated after the fact. You won't want to do that in this case, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, that
Project
guy's
to be doing that.
right.
So what I'd recommend you do is, you've kind of started to map them out a little bit, and then I can always follow up with Jeff, and, we can just put them out in bullet points and get you a written opinion on it.
I appreciate that. Oh, please go ahead.
If I could just, as not a lawyer, but as somebody very involved.
Could you, I don't mean to be rude, but could you try the microphone? Thank you very much. I gotta give you one.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just say a couple things about the two of the issues that you've just been talking about. I'm not a lawyer, and so it'd be great to have the lawyers weigh in, of course. Imminent danger. What we're saying is that once the dune at the toe of the bluff has disappeared, the houses and the bluff walk and anything behind it is in imminent danger. It's not a surprise. It's not unknown. We've watched erosion happen, moving from the north to the south for 30 or 40 years. So that, we believe, meets the definition of imminent danger. As far as the gap lots, I believe there's only 2 gap lots in the entire length. There's a chunk of the project that's already protected, so I'm not referring to that. That's there, it's installed, it was approved by you, along with the state. We got a permit.
Yes.
Okay.
No,
So,
to the side. Go on.
to the north, there are 3 homes and a vacant lot, which is, if there were no homes up there, those would still all be protectable in our view, because they're so close to the road that the road itself is a protectable reason to add the protection to the northern section of the project. On the southern section of the project, There are some lots that are also very close to the road and are protectable from that perspective. Then you get into a stretch of mostly pre-78 homes. There are two that under the state regulations are protectable, but under the local regulations are new homes, and so they're not protectable. And so from that perspective, they could be protected as gap lots. And that's it. So I know there's a lot of vacant land up there, but it is all protectable because it's so close, the bluff in those areas is so close to the road that you're protecting the infrastructure.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that the commission is raising good points that you know, clearly want input on, and I don't want to stop that conversation if there's any member that wants to continue. But I do want to know, I think we do want to know if there are conditions in which, in order to be able to approve the condition or formulate the condition, you would want additional information. So instead of actually just looking at the legal issues or the design issues, if we could think about or talk about the conditions and think, do you need more information to formulate those, if you want to.
I guess this speaks to the gap lots in the road, and I know we've all kind of asked this in roundabout ways before, but you know, the state act doesn't protect infrastructure, so there's, you know, a little bit of a hitch there. We have talked about the alternative for the most threatened part of the road being moving the road if that becomes a problem. And I know I've asked before to identify where is the infrastructure being protected. I guess it's the southern end. Like, where exactly are we claiming as infrastructure versus 78 versus gap lot? Like a really clear map of this is what we're claiming. Because again, infrastructure is not protectable under the state act.
And we have presented this back in the fall, on two separate occasions. And for the expanded project with the 2,900 round number linear feet, we have there are the two state eligible, non-local bylaw eligible homes, which are identified as gap lots. And then there are the 5 vacant homes, which are identified as gap lots. And, you know, the idea of the gap lot is having, so you can have the continuous extension of this project, because when you have a break in the protection, then you have an area that's narrow areas that are unprotected. So as Josh was going through, you know, we have 119 and 117, which are now vacant. You know, and those are they're vacant, but those are there to protect the public infrastructure of the road. That's landward of that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is where we currently have a permit if there was a breach that you can use the road.
That's in
on
the northern end.
119 and
That's in the
117.
northern end. 115, 113, 109 are all eligible pre-78 homes, state and local. 107A, 107, those ones are vacant, but eligible for protecting the infrastructure of the road. Then we go down to 105, 101, 99. Those are vacant. They were therefore eligible as the protecting the infrastructure of the road. 97. This is one of the ones that we've talked about in terms of being eligible under local and state. That's our what we've talked about. 93 eligible. 91 is a gap lot. That's one lot in between two, you know, in between there. We have 87. That's now vacant. but eligible as, to protect the infrastructure. So 9187 are for infrastructure, 85 is infrastructure. Continue further south, 83, that's an eligible home. 81, we've identified that that is a new dwelling, so that's not eligible under the bylaw, but it is eligible under the state regulations. We get, from there, we get down 79 through 71. Those are all eligible by state and local. 69, we've advocated that it's eligible for the state, not from local. 67, 65 are both eligible. And then as we continue down, 63, 61, 59, and we have included here 55. Those are all state and local eligible. So we've done them by count, we haven't done them by linear feet.
Right.
And that's both in correspondence that we provided to you and presented at the hearings.
Right.
So,
Thank you, I just want to piggyback that on, and I feel like I've said this before, but the alternative access, we've looked really hard, the town has looked really hard, engineers have looked really hard at, could this road be relocated? Now, you could relocate the actual road layout, the paved area, within the county layout, maybe 10 feet. Okay, you've got the water and the power and the sewer there, and that could all get relocated, but that would be very difficult because it's all on one side of the road. So you'd have to move all that stuff into essentially what's people's yards and then move the road. You could pick up 10 feet maybe by doing that. But there's no ability to just relocate the road to the other side behind the houses. That would require an eminent domain taking of other people's private land to make that happen. That is not in any conceivable way a reasonable alternative to require the town to do a taking of land to move a road, to burden one person to save another person. That is just not how the reasonable alternative standard works. The alternative access agreement that is in place in the case of a breach at the northern end of the road is only to allow for emergency access to be created on the other side of the breach in the event that there is permitting for this project and also then a failure. It is not an alternative where the project isn't needed because there's another way to do it. There's someplace to move the road. So there's no physical or legal way to avoid this problem from road relocation or alternative access. I wish there was. That would be much easier in a lot of ways. But abandonment and eminent domain are not going to be the solution here.
This is through the chair. I guess I am slightly confused about some of the documents we've received as far as that alternative access for the road as part of the current permitting. Because some of those documents have alluded to us that there is an option at that end. And I guess the other commissioners can weigh in on how they've perceived that, but that's my perception there, that it is an alternative, and that's why you guys have submitted it to us in documentation.
Well, we've submitted it because we're required to update you on it. But as someone who worked on drafting it, and I think George, you also worked on it as well, or at least reviewed it for the town, it pretty clearly provides that the right to use it is only available in the event that there's permitting and then also a failure, not just essentially if the town forces the failure by denying permitting and then comes in and goes through these people's yards to create a new road. That is not available. I know other people have characterized it that way to you, but that is not what the document says.
Well, if I may ask,
Town council to-
through the chair, may I ask town council?
Yeah, I would recommend putting that on my list.
Right.
The issue came up in the select board's meeting as well. The lady from the Coastal Conservancy was
No one seems
just
to
gave
know.
me, I'm not gonna characterize it she looked at me.
I
Just keep it factual. She looked at me.
know. She's dead
and
center
I-
right in there.
So I was weighing in on that question to the select board as well, so I'll include it in this. I think our interpretation is slightly different than has been represented by SBPF in terms of existing obligations under the alternative access agreement.
Okay.
But we'll clarify it and, or give our opinion on it, and then if there's further questions after that, you know, we can certainly answer them. One thing that came up on this issue too, and quite frankly, it's the first time I've seen it, and I talked to Jeff a little bit about it. You know, a local bylaw can be more restrictive than the Wetlands Protection Act. And in many ways, your local bylaw is more protective than the Wetlands Protection Act. You have a couple of additional interests that are protected, and you treat the 100-foot buffer zone as a resource area, things like that. What the law doesn't say is that the town can have a less restrictive bylaw than the Wetlands Protection Act. And one issue that's kind of popped into my mind as this has gone on is, you know, are you trying to enforce less restrictive provisions of your bylaw than the Wetlands Protection Act in talking about gap lots versus infrastructure? So I think we need to look at that issue as well. In other words, query whether you should be just treating this as a Wetlands Protection Act performance standard in terms of how you talk about protecting infrastructure versus pre-78 structures.
Great.
Thank you. Hey,
And that issue actually came up when we went through this with DEP before, so I feel pretty confident and comfortable with that, and I get the point. But I do want to say that sort of regardless of what the alternative access agreement says, that for the northern point, I do want to note that that's really only for that northern point. That doesn't deal with the whole rest of what we're dealing with here. It really only deals with that hotspot there. So there's no saving the whole thing based on that one. Even if it said what people say it says that it doesn't say, it still doesn't solve the problem. So unfortunately, there's no way to just move the road to the other side and call it a day. If there was, you know, we'd probably be figuring out how to pay for doing that.
Steve, can you explain, what does that access provide for that we're all talking about right now?
Where or
Yeah,
what?
where, what number of extra road? What would it?
So basically, if you go to where the parking lot is for the
Observation.
lighthouse, there's
Oh.
a really
Yeah, right, I know.
steep
Yeah.
area.
And so
Yeah.
how far south would that, is access there?
Yeah,
Right.
it goes from essentially from Fulton Road through two people's yards
Yeah,
to the
to the parking lot.
parking lot, and it cuts through other private. It cuts through the golf club and other private property there.
So
So,
it goes up to Baxter Road in 110, 112 Baxter.
Yeah.
got it, okay, all right.
So
Yeah.
you know, essentially it creates a back door.
Right, so in the event of a breach somewhere, and what's the hottest spot, what's the breach trigger for this? We're talking about
And so at the time that was put in, the idea was that there are some vacant lots up there that are currently protected by the geotubes,
Yeah.
where there was a thought that bluff might erode close enough that the road itself would be considered unsafe,
right,
or might fail. And if that happened, you'd have a breach, and then you'd have people with no way to get from the southern side to their homes. And so this would create an alternative access for those northern homes, but it in no way saves everything else.
right, so, this is one of those situations where if the road can't be breached now because there's a geotube in front of it in this trigger spot, then how would you ever trigger the road permit?
So
That's a 22.
Yeah, well, that's the point, is it's a fail-safe to try to, in case there is a breach. It's not that we allow the breach because we cannot have that.
Right, but is the town on the hook to provide the road unless it gets breached? Maybe that's through you, Andy.
Go ahead.
Maybe to George.
I think I'm following this, but there's a difference between a legal interpretation of if the alternative access agreement is in place now and it's enforceable regardless of your action on the expansion project. That's a legal issue, and I think we respectfully disagree about the applicability of that on the ground today. If there's a breach in the area that it covers. But that's different than a factual issue as to the availability of the alternative access agreement as a potential reasonable alternative for the expanded project area. That would be
I
a
agree
different
with that.
factual issue. So and if you carry it through, if the area I'm not holding anything back. I mean, in my opinion, looking at this, if there's a breach, regardless of your action on the project expansion, if there's a breach, the alternative access agreement is in place to cover that. It would be enforceable because it's tied to the permitting of the existing structure.
Right.
But if you're thinking about reasonable alternatives to protection of other areas, then it's a factual question as to whether that what the area covered by the alternative access agreement, if that would be an alternative to a breach in another area, in the expanded project area.
And I agree with George that having a back door to get access to those houses is not the same thing as having a reasonable alternative
Yeah,
to
I'll
not
clarify
protecting
that with him.
these
Yeah.
homes and creating access
Yes.
down the road. Those are just two totally different questions.
Let me try and just add a little bit here. So when we agreed to work with the town on this project 5 years ago, we said we'll do our best to work cooperatively with the neighbors to find a backup plan in case the geotube project that we want to put in fails. Because that could happen, right? We could have it be permitted, we could do everything right, and it could all get washed away. And then the road would be breached, and where would we be? That was the basis on which we worked out with the golf club, and Wisconsin Trust, neighbors, a backup plan. Deanne and her group have always wanted this to be an alternative that is available so that if the town were to decide to, on its own, simply remove the geotube project, that this plan would be able to go into effect. That's what you have wanted, but that is not what the agreement says. The agreement says you can have it, but only if the project fails. Not you can have it if you decide to remove the project.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest if we've added that analysis to George's list to do, that we have that discussion when we have that opinion.
Right.
I don't want to waste everyone's time in debating the merits of that, and if town council's preparing that opinion, I think that makes more sense. I do just want to clarify something too to Ben's question that he had asked. That original concern of access was really related to the properties that were to the north of Bayberry Lane because they're isolated. So further south of Bayberry Lane, there are other, there's Ann's, there's Butterfly, there's other ones that connect to Baxter Road, but north of Bayberry, there's no secondary way
Yeah.
to get from Pulpus Road over. So that was the area, and that's also the area where it's closest to the road, but that was the area that was really being viewed in framing that agreement.
So Bayberry North.
Yeah, it has,
Correct.
It has a longer title. It's not the alternative access agreement, it's alternative access to North.
Yeah, it's like the alternative access to, north of Bayberry Lane, and it's long. But I think that analysis will come from town council, but that's where that was viewed as the concern, because that's an isolation point where if the road breaches north of Bayberry Lane, the houses that are north of the breach have no alternative means of access. If the road breached south of Bayberry Lane, obviously things to the north of Bayberry Lane could still get from Bayberry Lane up, and then you could get in from the south in other directions. So that was the major point of concern for potentially isolating properties.
Just one thing to add to that, that is important about the history. SPPF did put quite a bit of work into getting the alternative access agreement to the north end of Baxter Road in place. And it was part of the negotiation with the then Board of Selectmen and the working group of members from Concom that, in other words, if the town went ahead and issued the license for allowing the existing project in that project area, they were trying to get quid pro quos for that to protect the town's long-term interests. And one of those was the alternative access agreement to be in place, as a backstop to that project. And it was a lot, they negotiated for property owners to lock themselves into a certain amount that they would accept for a taking award. It locked in property owners not to contest the amount of a betterment assessment that would then go forward. The town had to go forward with that project, pay for the takings and pay for the project. So the property owners that bought into that alternative access agreement also agreed that they would be bettered for that project and they would not contest that amount. So there, that was a significant agreement that, is not really within your jurisdiction, but it is important for you to, to know that history and where that came from.
Yeah, but we agreed to that as part of the town cooperating to make the project happen. Not for the town to say, okay, we got a backup plan, now we're gonna abandon the project or reject the project.
Again, I would say let's,
Well, wait, yeah, until we have.
I think
but
everyone's
appreciate it.
opinions are
No,
clear.
yeah,
Let's
I understand.
wait for town council's
Yep.
opinion and then we
Otherwise, we're
can
just talking in circles there. Okay.
debate that out.
Well, are there other questions from the board? Concerns? Yes, the public.
I've asked all my questions
please.
over the days. I don't have any new questions.
Okay.
I'm done too.
It's not yet.
Okay, I'm done. Done?
It's the first time I've been.
Uh-oh. Okay, well, let's open it up to the public. Public comment for new concerns. I don't want to be going around circles with old concerns. So is there any comments from the public?
Mr. Chairman, just a quick one, maybe to
Could you come to the microphone for the record?
well, it'll just be, just to add to the questions for town council, is that we have been in communication and open session with the select board and discussing various scenarios. And something I think that the select board has said is that they don't want to be in a position this time as they were last time. They want to support you in your decision. And I'm not sure what that means, and I would ask through you to put on the list for town council that if this permit is denied, can the town withdraw its assent, thus obviating an appeal? Okay?
That sounds like a.
That's an appropriate question for them.
Well, no, I'm wondering if that's more of a selectment question. I'm not, I mean, it's hard to know. Well, personally, question. but-
Please come up to the microphone.
Yeah, I think we're getting a discussion here.
All right.
Appreciate it. I'm just wondering, it sounds almost like a select
just-
board question.
Excuse me, I understand
With-
that, but they are interrelated, and I hear things said to you that I think are being misrepresented. So all I'm just saying, maybe you can listen to the select board tape, but they want to support you in whatever decision you make here. If you deny it, it seems to me if the property owner withdraws their permission, then it can't go forward, even if it's appealed. And if that's an inappropriate question to ask in this venue of town council, we will ask it through the select board.
Thank you. Interesting. Yeah. I think they said that before to us, didn't they?
I'm pretty sure they did guarantee they were gonna back us up.
I think they pushed it.
I think they had a financial limit on that, and we were over that limit, and it wasn't very high, so. I've heard that before, I'm sorry.
Okay. Are there other questions from the public? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily Molden for the Nantucket Land Council. I don't necessarily want to take up too much of your time tonight, but Trey is here, so I think I just wanted to get a sense of whether the commission's going to end up continuing the hearing or for the applicant, or if it's going to be closed, just as far as getting some final comments in, if it was going to be closed, I would just want to make sure that there was an opportunity to do that, so.
I don't think we're close tonight, especially we got
Right.
questions from council.
That is not necessarily
Right.
your decision to make.
Ah, it's
So-
true too.
Through you, I just wanted to, I guess, make it known that if it was going to be closed, we would have some more things we
Right.
would
Well, I would-
love to add.
I would suggest that anyone that wishes to comment, to put their comments on record, and then you don't have to worry about that choice.
Yeah.
Not to make you
Okay,
talk
well,
longer, but.
Sure, in that case, I guess I would just invite Trey to come up since he is here to make additional comments that he might have.
Good evening. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time rehashing and arguing.
Thank you.
We won't come to a conclusion tonight on that. My only suggestions, kind of based on the questions and the talking going on is, just because there is a possibility of building a structure, if you read the guidelines, and so the Wetlands Protection Act, which you're actually supposed to act on, is that there is no guarantee of a structure being authorized. I think you should look at, what are the impacts? Can you actually meet those standards? And I think that's how you're gonna have to base your decision. I mean, obviously you ask them or you ask me that we're gonna come up with different answers. And the one point I did want to talk about, because it did come up, was gap lots. I actually made a call to CZM and DEP and talked about gap lots and what's the standard for them. And they don't particularly have a written standard, but they did point out that in Plymouth, they've recently turned down a project that had a 200-foot gap between pre-78 houses because it wasn't warranted. So obviously that's something to consider. We've been suggested or heard a number of times that there are approvable, but that would suggest that that might not be true. And they said there's also other cases where gap lots of that size have not been warranted. So I think that's something you guys should consider relative to the Wetland Protection Act. And depending on how you guys decide, I think you should look at your previous order and evaluate that. I mean, we've talked about sediment issues and, can we mitigate this? And the question is, you can listen to either one of us, but, is the number reasonable? Does it make sense to what you've seen? I mean, you were talking about segmenting the project going forward. We've had a 5-year segment, and I have to agree that, you have to base your decision on what you've seen to date going forward. Extending that out, I don't know if that'd be really practical, but you already had the option to do that. And so, do you think that number is correct? Do you think the way they're putting out mitigation, is that correct? Is there some way you could actually condition this to make this better so you aren't having an adverse impact, which is actually part of the Wetlands Protection Act, is that adverse impact. So, yeah, not so much a debate, but just some thoughts on, reading through them. I see these, and I see our debate going back and forth, but the conditions are fairly clear, and I think you guys could come to your own conclusion pretty well just by reading them and taking the last 5 years and listening to what everybody said and said, can I actually meet this condition, or does it fail this condition? So, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? Please.
I have a question, and it might be rehashing something I said before, because I've asked you all to look at the superseding order of conditions issued by DEP 5 years ago for the previous project, but it is on page 16.
Could you give your name for the record?
My name's Dirk Rogovic. I work for the Squam Association.
Thank you, Dirk.
I'm an attorney. I represent them. They are a homeowners association of butters to the north of this project who risk suffering damage to their property. Properties in the event there's a failure of this project to maintain the amounts and total drift of sand moving north along the coast. Yeah, it's on the very last page of 16 on the superseding order conditions. I brought it up, and when I hear somebody saying it's somebody's telling their version of what the version of what it says or whatnot, I just think you guys, it's in your record. You can ask Jeff to get it for you again. It's item number 22. The page looks like this. It's only half a page. You can read 22, you can read 21 above it, and you can see exactly what it says. And I don't think what it says is what SBPF represents that it says. I also don't think it has anything to do with what the town and SBPF worked out with agreements of settlement. I think they just totally ignored this. But it's still there. It's got a 6-year timeline on it. It's ticking away, and certainly other people are watching it. So, but it informs what you might be thinking about now in terms of the state refusing to give a permit and only allowing a temporary permit for protecting infrastructure. It doesn't mention gap lots, because all it was looking at was, at this point, was an emergency to allow access for emergency vehicles and other things to the houses to the north. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dirk. Go.
So if there's no more public comments, I don't want to cut anybody off.
Is there any more public comment? Other public? Okay, please.
So as fun as this would be if we had this go endlessly, it wouldn't be at all. I think that there are some important considerations. One is, to the extent a permit might be issued, we have to think about the construction timeline. To the extent a permit might be issued, we have to think about giving the select board the opportunity to negotiate a very strong license, and also to have town meeting approve a license or lease. So there's a lot of moving parts in this that are sort of outside of what you're dealing with. And then I think you all are aware that some of you may or may not be here starting next June, and we certainly don't want to lose members and then have to start over. So I think it would be very, very helpful if we can get a decision, in the near future. I think you have an incredible amount of information in front of you. I think Jeff is probably well prepared to draft a positive or negative motion at this point. He probably already has one. I think he's mentioned that he's got drafts going. So I don't know that we need to keep the public hearing open indefinitely. And I think that getting some resolution at the next meeting would be helpful. I think we're inclined to leave it open, at least to give town council the opportunity to provide the memo that you've asked for.
Great, yeah.
And then at that time to discuss potentially, hopefully, an order of conditions, and then close the public hearing at the next meeting, I think would be the goal. I don't think that our side intends to submit new technical information. Frankly, I'm not sure anybody else does either. But that's what I'd like to see this. I think you'd all like to see it, wrap up in the near future on that kind of scale. I don't know if you've talked offline about a potential future date.
At this point, no. So thinking about it, obviously, just to kind of rehash for people that don't necessarily know the procedure and are following along, and not to talk for too long, as soon as the public hearing is closed, the commission is required to issue out a decision within 21 days of closure. So by closing a public hearing, you set finality to it at some point. So I think part of the question would be important, and through you, Mr. Chairman, how long town council is going to need to prepare the opinions that you put together. Obviously, they work pretty quickly and do a good job, but I don't think you want to say we need that opinion in 48 hours and put the clock on. I'm not saying he couldn't get it done, but having them time to vet it. So that may be one piece to setting it. We may have the ability, as much as we try to avoid it, to use our meeting on the 10th to at least review where we are information-wise with this, and if we have town council's opinion in, to set a subsequent date as close as possible to that, to have a discussion.
Is that the regular meeting?
Yep, the 10th is the regular meeting, since we have to continue to date certain. The week, obviously, of the 1st, so next week is out. We're not supposed to schedule meetings for town meeting week as much as possible. I don't want to get yelled at for scheduling a meeting. But I think those are
Third
what
week is
school vacation.
Yeah.
So we have a few forces working against us schedule-wise. But I think, obviously, from the information requested tonight, I think the most critical piece is probably the piece that you've requested George to put together.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he has a rough guess on what he would look for time for that. That's a terrible question.
I'm just more concerned about being available to come to whenever you put it on the continued hearing. I can deal with that, whatever deadline I need to for getting an opinion done, but I want to make sure I'm physically available. It's
You're right.
a busy time of year, and I have a school I have that school vacation week in there, 15th to the 19th.
Yeah, we're the same week, right? Same week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll call that week out altogether. So there would be the regular meeting on the 10th, where we could try to do a meeting that Monday. That's pretty short order to get everything.
I'll be gone
Yeah.
on Monday.
So there's that. We could review then and set a schedule for a different date for like the week of the 22nd, which would be, we could keep it on Mondays and go to April 22nd. If that would work for people, that would keep us on our regular SPPF Mondays and away from our regular meeting weeks.
22nd works for me.
Does the 22nd work for you, George? That's 22nd it is, I would say.
And if we could try to get, if anyone else has information to submit, obviously we usually try to get it in the Friday before. So if people could be really beholden to those deadlines, that would be
Right,
helpful.
especially for you guys, if there's any comment you would make on them.
The 22nd is not.
It's not.
No, that is not a meeting.
So I want to be sensitive if we go to the 10th, potentially with the idea of really scheduling a more substantive meeting on the 22nd. If you were to make a decision at that meeting, with a 21-day clock ticking, we're getting pretty close to terms ending in June. So I think we should be trying to be sensitive to
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with Stephen that we may have to condense our hearing schedule a bit if we get there, because the threat of losing a couple people is real, and then that would cause a withdrawal and then a refile, and would have to start from scratch with potentially 2 new commissioners to figure it out. So,
I think 3 or
yes.
22nd, 21 days from April 22nd.
God.
Would be in May the,
It'd be like the middle of May.
yeah,
So I think we'd be pretty committed to closing it, on that meeting.
on the 22nd,
Yeah,
yeah.
which would,
But then we don't need a meeting on the 10th.
Well, the meeting on the 10th would just be to confirm.
that's your regular meeting if you
Oh.
want to put it on the
I
10th.
think we
Well,
should see what.
Good on the phone.
I mean, I would
Yeah,
recommend
we know where that is.
continuing the hearing for a date certain,
Yeah, we have to
Yeah.
not using the 10th. I would just recommend putting it on for a date certain on the continued public hearing.
Yeah, why don't we just choose the 22nd and just
Yeah.
April
Well,
22nd.
Just from a process point of view, if we go to the 22nd and you get your report from George and we have any other conversation, you would then also need likely another meeting, I think, based on the way we did it last time, if there was a positive or if there was a negative, whatever, you would then, I think what we would do at the end of that meeting is Jeff would ask you if you want to make a positive or negative order, and then we'd need another meeting to review and vote on that. Is that the process you see happening?
Well, I think we're all on the same page, if I may interrupt.
Yes.
That we want to have an actual decision before there's a change of the guard.
Right.
Before I drop
So,
dead.
but I guess that could be, that would happen within the 21 days, right? We would close
yes.
on the 22nd with the idea that then you would then schedule another meeting within 21 days in which the board would vote on a positive or negative.
Yes. I would even feel confident in saying if there needed to be, more than one meeting to hash out the order of conditions and get it done within that 21-day period, that would be definitely possible.
Okay, I just, it's worth gaining.
Don't take offense to this. I think we all want to get to the end.
Yeah.
No offense.
And
I
I-
like the idea of SPF Monday, though. That's pretty good.
I'm trademarking that, by the way.
Yeah, that's like Monday Night Football. but
Yeah.
not at
SPPF
all.
Mondays.
Yeah, gotta be done.
SPPF Mondays on NCTV. That's what
right.
we'll be watching.
Okay.
So is that where we are? That we're looking at.
I would recommend the 22nd if that's palatable to everybody.
Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
That works for me, too. Okay. Great. So you would-
Well, then I would make a request to continue to the 22nd.
Thank you very much. We will continue to the 22nd. Thanks very much, everybody. Do you have other business?
Yes, we have to get through those minutes.
Okay. The approval of minutes for 11/5, 11/19, 12/3, 2/11/3, and 11.
So just to clarify Mr. Golding's motion, that these are the minutes related solely towards the SBPF hearings. They're not of our regular meetings.
That's right.
Not to speak for.
Do we have a second? That was a second. All those in favor? Aye. Very good. Any opposed? I don't think so.
I got nothing else.
I do want to complain that Patty's cookies there was very unfair.
What is that?
What
What is that? No one
I
knows
was
who
afraid
they...
they might be poison. They were just up here.
Those haven't been opened yet.
Kept everyone away from the microphone.
Yeah, right.
Is it a bribe?
Or they could have been sitting here.
All right, we're still in. I hate to be mean.
I
We're,
know,
we're still in
meeting.
active
I know,
session, so
don't worry.
Jake, someone just pointed.
I don't think we need to do the rest of the
No
items.
monitoring
if-
points, nothing enforcement
No.
actions, no meetings. Any I'll ask for comments. Any comments from the commission? Okay. Administrative staff reports, none?
All good.
Okay, you have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Very good. Thanks, guys.
All right. Keep in mind that the recorders will still be